Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome along to the TMS SOLIDWORKS 2022 launch event. I'd like to thank you all for attending today and hope that you'll enjoy the sessions that we have planned for you over the next few days. Today, we'll look at how SOLIDWORKS can help you to work faster and smarter through some new features and enhancements. We'll also show you the latest system requirements to ensure that you're running at or above the recommended spec. And we'll then finish off by opening up for some questions after the presentations. There's a lot for us to cover, so I'll hand you over to Mike now, who has some important updates and announcements to make from the support team. Over to you, Mike.
Hello everyone, and thank you again for joining us on day one of our 3D Experience in SOLIDWORKS 2022 launch. Last year, the whole world was confronted with one of the biggest global emergencies we've ever seen. We've learned to adapt, diversify, and help each other over this period. New technologies and products have been released which not only help protect us, but also sustain us while our outstanding medical communities care for those who unfortunately may be stricken. Thankfully, over the last few months, we're starting to see some of the things returning to a new normal, and it's clear that industry is on a bounce back. We're seeing lots of activity in various sectors, which is great news for the economy. Earlier in the year, when we started seeing this recovery, we were able to bring in another member of the support team and position our resources in readiness. If you haven't already spoken or been trained by him yet, I'm sure you'll hear from Kieran Mooney at some point soon. Another big event for us this year was the launch of our new website. It's been a long time in the making, but it's here with us now, so please check it out when you get a few minutes and browse through all of the new content. Pay particular attention to the training pages because we'll be sending you a 20% discount voucher for any of the courses just for attending this year's launch event. The voucher can be redeemed through our website and it's valid for up to 12 months. If you don't receive your voucher by email at the end of this week, then please let us know and we'll make sure it's sent out to you. At the top of the website, you'll find links to the various SOLIDWORKS products, gold partner products, events and news articles. You'll also find a link to our support page, which contains important contact information, how to log a ticket with us, and various other useful resources. This year, our launch event is presented over 2 days, and we'll be introducing a multicoloured ocean creature called Nemo to demonstrate the new functionality. No, it's not the famous little fish, but a submersible vehicle for us fragile, air-breathing humans to experience the actual Nemo's world. Today we'll take a look at some of the changes of the last few releases, and then using the awesome Nemo dataset, we'll let loose with the fantastic new enhancements coming your way in the 2022 release. So if you haven't already registered for tomorrow's event, make sure you head over to the Day 2 registration now and reserve your place. You can find this on our website. Our 2022 event is being broadcast via Teams webinar. It's very similar to how we presented last year, but with a lot more interactive content. We'll be running polls and quizzes in the chat window, and during the session you can ask us any questions, or wait till the end when we open up the mics for anyone who would like to ask about the new enhancements you'll see shortly. If you're already watching and listening to this point, then there's no need to go over the basics of how to join. Depending on how you're logged into this event, you should have the little chat icon either on the top or bottom of your screen. I'd recommend you click this button now and keep an eye on the conversations. This is also where we'll be adding the quizzes and where you can ask any questions before the end of the event. I think we're all ready now, so sit back, relax, and prepare to experience the best ever release of SOLIDWORKS.
Okay guys, so we're just about to reveal SOLIDWORKS 2022, which of course is going to be the best SOLIDWORKS release ever. But before we submerge ourselves in the new and updated features for this release, what better way to start this event than having a walk down memory lane to see some of the enhancements that we've gained over the past couple of years. After all, a large number of these enhancements are implemented because of you, the SOLIDWORKS users, and your demand for new boundary pushing capabilities with every single release. Now, as Mike mentioned, for this year's release, or for this year's event, we are changing it up a little bit. Instead of you guys simply sitting back and watching the full event, we'd like to have some audience participation. After all, this is your event. We want to hear from you. So feel free to add any comments into the chat window along the way. Maybe there's something that you like the look of, or maybe it's something that you'll find useful, or maybe you've just got a question about one of the new enhancements. Whatever it is, we'd like to know about it, guys. Throughout the event, we'll have a number of polls for you to participate in. These polls will be accessible in the chat window. And what better time to start with these polls than right now? We'd love to know, what is your favourite enhancement over the past few years? Maybe it's one that you see on screen, or maybe it's another one that you've got in mind that you use on a daily basis. So pop on over to the chat window and let us know about it. Now I've got to say, guys, that is one of the coolest enhancements that I've seen over the past few years. The ability to have flexible components that updates as the assembly moves. What a great little addition that was. Now here's one of my personal favourites though, the mouse gesture wheel. Now if no one's used, or if some of you haven't used the mouse gesture wheel, I recommend you take a look at it, because you can increase your workflow so much by using those mouse gestures. The fact they're fully customizable just makes it so much easier to work with. And what better combination? Your mouse gesture wheel along with the keyboard S key shortcut bar. Again, fully customizable to speed up your workflow. With the addition of the 3D Experience platform, life got so much more flexible, especially with the X apps. I mean, X-Shape is such a fun tool to play around with, and look how easy you can drag the model around. So I'm sure you guys will agree there's been some great enhancements over the past few years. Now if you've not already added your favourite enhancement over the past few years, please pop on in that chat box, let us know about it. We'd love to know what you like to work with. But from there, I think we're now set and we're ready to dive in to the new features of SOLIDWORKS 2022.
Thanks there for the introduction and little kind of recap there of some of the previous enhancements throughout the past couple of years. What we're going to look at now is obviously the enhancements in SOLIDWORKS 2022, and we're going to kind of break things down into three main sections. We've got some on-the-surface enhancements, a deeper dive into those and additional enhancements, and then looking at some of the deepest capabilities, which we'll actually cover a little bit in tomorrow. Same with some of the stuff in the deeper dive section. So I'm going to take us through and start us off with the on the surface section, where we're really going to look at pretty much the kind of top 15 enhancements in SOLIDWORKS 2022. Then we'll be going through the deeper dive, and that'll go through each of the kind of main SOLIDWORKS product areas in depth with all of those enhancements. And then we've got the final section with the deepest capabilities. It's going to look a little bit about some of the enhancements in regards to the 3D Experience platform, with the whole 3D Experience Works, and what's new in 2022 in there. So starting us off then with that on the surface, we've got that three main sections showing off the top 15 enhancements to work smarter, faster, and work together. For trying to work a little bit smarter, one enhancements we'll look at is in regards to hybrid modeling, where we can combine the advantages of mesh data that we might have generated along with the normal kind of parametric features that we might have used previously: extrudes, revolves, cuts, sweeps, lofts, all of that good stuff, and they're combining the two of them together. We've then got some enhancements to the configuration tables, where we can have the software generate some of the tables for us based on any kind of existing variations and changes between different configurations. Got some improvements to the component patterns when we're working in the assembly environment in both the kind of initial seed and additional instances in there. We've got changes to how geometric tolerances are added in regards to the user interface and how we modify them as well. We've also got what's referred to as a stud wizard, which is a new feature inside SOLIDWORKS in regards to threads. And then the next couple of big enhancements are in regards to the performance side of things, so trying to allow us to work a little bit faster than before. And one of those ways is regarding the command search throughout the Q key, as well as the S key, which some of us may or may not be aware of and use day to day. We've got quite a lot of changes and enhancements to the detailing mode in regards to drawings. Detailing mode might be something that you guys are familiar with, might not be, but we'll look at some of the enhancements in there to make working with drawings a lot quicker and easier without having to wait for all the models to load. We've got some big improvements to assemblies where models can open up a lot quicker than they could previously. Obviously, we've got one of the models that Scott was just talking about, and we'll see that in a bit more detail as we go through the day. We've then got some changes to the quick access bar, and here it's particular to the mates side of things. We've also got various other enhancements to the kind of quick access bar that pops up. Going back to that detailing mode in the drawings, we've got expanded capabilities in there in regards to standardized views with sheet metal and flat pattern views, as well as additional tables and options we've got inside there as well. And then for the final couple of main enhancements, we've got the section on kind of working together. And that starts us off with some enhancements to the installation side of SOLIDWORKS, particularly for those that are using admin images to install SOLIDWORKS. We've got a number of improvements there. We've then got a lot of enhancements to the 3D Experience platform in terms of cloud-based sculpting. So in regards to things like the X shape that we've got on screen at the moment for some of our kind of sub-D modelling. We then have some improvements to the data management side of things. Not only PDM that we'll look at, but also here we've got improvements to the Innovia side of things in the platform, with kind of data management in the cloud. We then have a number of enhancements to the simulation side of things. Here we've got some enhancements to the Simolia side of things with simulation in the platform. We've also got simulation improvements in general inside SOLIDWORKS. And finally, the next main one is enhancements to 3D Experience SOLIDWORKS with built-in out-of-the-box platform connectivity tools as well. And that's just kind of 15 of the kind of key enhancements in SOLIDWORKS 2022. However, what we'll do now is we'll take a kind of deeper dive and a better look at some more enhancements that are coming with the new release. And for that, I'm going to pass it over to Kieran, who'll take us through the first section where we're going to look at some enhancements to the user interface of the SOLIDWORKS applications.
Let's take a more detailed look at the enhancements for SOLIDWORKS 2022, starting off with the user experience. Now, a few of the things that we have here are, as you previously saw, we've now got the search command and the S key shortcut menu. We can define coordinate systems with numerical values. We can even hide and show reference geometry with our Q key now. And there's also some nice little additions like little information bubbles for our system options. Gives you a little bit more information about what that option actually does. We can read the full length of dismissed messages, so when we're trying to show them again. And we've also had some updates and improvements to the notification and message bar styles, so that they're now more up to date. But let's take a look at what this actually looks like within SOLIDWORKS. Now, using the Nemo as an example, within SOLIDWORKS 2022, these enhancements to the user experience help you be more productive with SOLIDWORKS. For this Nemo, it wouldn't be complete without all 4 subsea thrusters in place. And as previously mentioned, we now have the search bar shortcut in our S key. So we can now quickly and easily search for the command that we're interested in, or even better, we can have SOLIDWORKS show us exactly where that command is for future reference. Now, to get the second thruster in place, they've been calculated by a team of engineers. So I can quickly and easily type in the exact X, Y, and Z locations, along with its rotations, in order to get it into the exact location that it needs to be. Now, by default, the origin of this little assembly is hidden. But through the use of the Q key, I can now bring out that origin and mate it to the coordinate system, making it a snap to get that into place. You'll also notice that our coordinate systems have been updated. We can now create sketches, section views, and a whole lot more from our coordinate systems. We can even see that we can select the planes, the axis, and the origin of that coordinate system. Now, to get the remaining 2 thrusters in place, again, we're going to make use of this S key search command. And frequently used commands, such as the mirror command, can quickly be added to our shortcut bar with a click of a button. To get the remaining 2 thrusters in place, we can make use of that Q key as well to bring up our planes, so we can quickly and easily mirror those across to the opposite sides. Going over to system options here, and we can see we now have these little information bubbles next to some of our options. And when we hover over them, it's going to give us a bit more information about what that option actually does. Again, if we ever looked at an option before and thought, what does that actually do though? Well, now we know. On top of that, to help with the update of our system options, we'll now also find that within our dismissed messages dialog, when we hover over one of those messages, it gives the full message now. So if you're trying to find that message that you want to show again, all we need to do is hover over them to find the one that we're looking for, making it a whole lot easier. Even notification boxes like this save box, or save reminder down at the bottom right here, has been updated and looks more modern to fit in with other messages as well. Now, while this one isn't strictly new to 2022, guys, I want to show you the pack and go tool. Because when it comes to working with assemblies and collecting up all of its references, there's no better tool than the pack and go command, where we can package this up into either a single folder or even a zip file if you want to send it over. Now, for you guys that have used us for support in the past, I'm pretty sure you'll be familiar with the pack and go tool. If you've never used it before, I recommend you have a little look at it. But I'm sure you'll agree, through the use of all these little enhancements, it's made the entire user experience a little bit more friendlier and easier to use. Now, just jumping back a second to the notifications and message bar styles that have been updated, here's a few examples of what you might expect to see when it comes to SOLIDWORKS 2022. So as we mentioned, we've got the save reminder. Even when you load up SOLIDWORKS, you'll even find that you get a message to manage your add-ins. And it can take you directly into your add-ins for you. So it all looks a lot cleaner now. Now that wraps up the user experience section, guys. So what I'll do is pass you over to Scott, who's going to take you through some hybrid modelling within parts.
Thanks for that, Kieran. So we'll now jump ahead to the part environment and we'll take a look at this hybrid modelling section. So as you can see at the top there, we can now directly edit mesh B-rep bodies just like we would with a native SOLIDWORKS part. Our whole wizard slots can now be defined using arc centres or arc tangents. We can add draft in two directions when using a parting line. Our pack and go has now been improved so that it picks up the resultant bodies from the split part or save bodies commands. We can easily section about an axis. We'll see the introduction of the stud wizard, where we can now create a stud from an existing cylindrical boss or make one on the fly. And we'll see that our configuration properties are now easier to add and edit than they were before. So let's dive in and take a closer look. So designers demand the ability to create manufacturable products using an ever-increasing variety of file formats. SOLIDWORKS 2022 makes this easier than ever with new enhancements for mesh B-rep formats and tools that help you view and edit critical product information. Now this ball valve, equipped with a lockout tag feature, is perfect for this control panel, but the handle is too plain to be incorporated in a luxury product like the Nemo. The supplier provided their files in mesh B-rep format, and in SOLIDWORKS 2022, working with these files is just like working with native geometry, thanks to the new hybrid modelling capabilities. Creating features like chamfers, extrudes, reference planes, and more no longer require intermediate bodies and Boolean operations. The handle needs a slot for a lock, and now in SOLIDWORKS 2022, whole wizard slot length can be defined by arc tangents or centres. Also, when positioning the slot, the tab key toggles between vertical and horizontal orientation. Manufacturing this handle will require some draft, and a bidirectional parting line draft would be the most appealing option in this scenario. In SOLIDWORKS 2022, you can now create draft in both directions when using a parting line, rather than having to create two separate draft features to achieve the same outcome. Now as we can see here, this mesh file contains 3 bodies, but the manufacturer needs access to the individual components. So in SOLIDWORKS 2022, Pack and Go now recognises the references created when using the save bodies and split part commands. Now this way you can choose which files you need without having to find them manually in Windows Explorer. Now as I'm sure we all know, section views are a great way to inspect components, but sometimes a suitable plane just isn't available for us to select to get the right kind of view that we're looking for. Now in SOLIDWORKS 2022 you can specify a section view from any cylindrical face, conical face or axis, as we can see here. Now these 22mm cut threads are useful for rapid prototyping, but it's too much detail for higher volume manufacturing and they make the file large and complex. This new stud wizard is a great choice here as it automatically recognises the diameter of the boss but still provides a list of different thread sizes and pitches to use, and you can even create an undercut with full control over the dimensions. In SOLIDWORKS 2022, configuration specific properties have been separated into 2 tabs, configuration properties and properties summary. In the first tab, property information is added just like you'd expect. Now you can choose which configuration they're applied to using the drop down. The Properties Summary tab provides a useful way to compare configurations based on a custom property. Now, designers sometimes have no choice when it comes to the files they receive from suppliers, as I'm sure we're all aware of, but we still need to get the design through to several different manufacturing methods, and SOLIDWORKS 2022 has all the tools you need to get the job done fast and efficiently, while providing improved access to critical product information. So that covers the hybrid modelling section on parts, and we're now going to go ahead and take a look at the structure systems as well. So as we can see in this section, we now have the ability to quickly create multiple secondary structural members from a point. We can define and insert components used to bolt members together. Gussets and end caps are no longer just for weldments now, they're supported in structural members. We can now mirror across two planes, reducing the number of features in the tree, and we can edit profiles for flanges created with the circular edge of a non-planar base. So let's take a further look into that now. SOLIDWORKS makes it easy to create frames and structures with structure systems, and in 2022 it's no exception, with enhancements to secondary members, the introduction of correction elements and more. Secondary members are defined using existing structural bodies, and these vertical posts will be carrying a heavy compressive and bending load, so it will need extra support. Now, creating multiple secondary members is fast in SOLIDWORKS 2022, now that you can select a point and multiple bodies. All corner treatments are just as intuitive to define as they have been in the past, giving you full control over the end result. Also new to SOLIDWORKS this year is the ability to define or insert connection elements, and these are great for members that are designed to be bolted rather than welded. These legs, for example, require a base plate so the cradle can be attached to the floor. Just select the member and the plate is automatically centered at the end. If a connection element doesn't meet your design needs, it can be adjusted on the fly. Now, these forklift lifting channels may need to be replaced if damaged, so a connection element is perfect for this situation. Defining the position of the connection element is easy. Simply select the faces of the members, then use the convenient member planes to centre the element. The connection element is smart and can cut predefined holes in the members you select. The gussets and end caps are also now supported for structural members in SOLIDWORKS 2022, and as you can see here, they're just as easy to define as before. Mirroring features and components is a very commonly used function in SOLIDWORKS, and now for 2022 you can mirror across two planes or faces, which I'm sure you will all agree is a really nice enhancement. Operations like this one are now much quicker and easier as they no longer require two separate mirror features. Now, you may or may not remember from last year that SOLIDWORKS introduced the ability to create an edge flange on the circular edge of a non-planar base. Now, this has been improved to allow you to edit the flange profile directly inside the property manager, so you can now specify the exact length of flange that you want. So structure systems are a powerful but flexible tool, and with these new enhancements to secondary members, connection elements, mirroring and sheet metal, creating frames and structures is easier than ever. So with that, I'm now going to pass you back to Kieran, who is going to take a look at some of the enhancements to assemblies.
Thanks for that, Scott. Looks like there's some great enhancements in there for the parts section this year. And I've got to say, those structure systems are looking smarter than ever. When structure systems came out a few years ago, I saw that and I thought, wow, that is a powerful tool to use. But it just keeps getting better and better with every single release. So it's great to see. But with that said, we're now going to move on to assemblies. Now, for assemblies, guys, I broke this down into two sections. First off, we're going to have a look at assembly performance, and then we'll move on to enhancements to those assembly features within there as well. But starting off with the performance side of things, and of course, there's always the elephant in the room when it comes to assembly performance. So let's get that out of the way first of all. How long is it going to take to open a large assembly, fully resolved, in SOLIDWORKS 2022? Well, the answer, of course, is faster than ever. If you don't believe me, let's just take a look at that. Because what we have on screen here is SOLIDWORKS 2022 on the right-hand side and SOLIDWORKS 2021 on the left. We're going to open up this Nemo assembly, fully resolved. This assembly has over 6,000 components in it. It has over 250 unique assemblies. And the entire dataset comes to a total of 1.36 gigabytes. And notice how in SOLIDWORKS 2022 it opens in just 2 minutes and 35 seconds. But SOLIDWORKS 2021, still thinking about it. In actual fact, in SOLIDWORKS 2021, it takes a total of 4 minutes and 14 seconds in order to open that assembly fully resolved. I'm sure you can agree, there's absolutely no comparison there. It's almost 40% faster within SOLIDWORKS 2022. And the great thing about it, guys, is the larger that your assembly is, the bigger the benefit that you should reap from this. The bigger the difference you'll see. So that addresses the elephant in the room. Next up, I want to move on to large design review. Now, large design review is a great way of working when you have these large data sets because you don't always need to load all of that data in. It doesn't always need to be fully resolved. And that's where large design review plays to its strengths. So let's take a look at how it's changed. So again, we're going to open up this Nemo assembly in large design review this time. And when it opens up, what we'll find is that it opens up in a mere 13 seconds, just a fraction of the time as to what it would take to be fully resolved. Now that's impressive. Now, within Large Design View, there's some useful tools that you can use, but new to 2022 is the option to open a drawing for that assembly in detailing mode. Now, if we open that drawing up in detailing mode, again, we've got a little counter going here, guys, but we'll notice just how quickly that drawing opens up. Now, considering it's a drawing of such a large assembly, again, it opens in the fraction of the time it would had it been fully resolved. Large Design Review is a great way of working with drawings if you have some pre-set up views within there, where we can then come in and start annotating the drawing. We can add in things like dimensions, any annotations, maybe we want to add in some tables within there as well. It just makes life a whole lot faster. Because there's no need to load in all of that excess data that we're not actually using. But going back to our assembly here, what we have the option to do now from our main assembly in Large Design Review is we can actually open up sub-assemblies also in Large Design Review. Following on from that, we can even open up any of the data fully resolved from that right button click as well. So we can start to load in the bits of information that we want, while still keeping everything else as light as possible. Again, it's just streamlining our process, allowing us to do our work a whole lot quicker. Now, if any of you haven't used Large Design Review before and you work with these large data sets, I'd highly recommend you have a look at it, especially with these new enhancements coming through. It's making it a whole lot better. Now, that brings me to the end of that section, guys. So that's assembly performance. And unfortunately, you're stuck with me for a little bit longer because I'm now going to take you through assembly features as well. Now, just a quick look at some of the enhancements that we have for assembly features. So we now have an easier way of moving components within our assemblies where we have a triad to use. Within our Quick Mates toolbar, we now have the option to control the alignment. Pattern-driven patterns have got a whole lot smarter. We've got some great enhancements to configuration tables within there. And finally, we've also got options to exclude components from a bill of materials, but by default. So let's take a look at how these work. Well, starting with the component where we left off from the last little section here, guys. What I want to do is I want to add in a few fasteners. Well, in actual fact, these fasteners already exist within my assembly. But by simply selecting them from the tree, you notice how this triad automatically pops up, where I can then drag it along its axis or even rotate it to get it into position. From there, I can then start to get to work mating this component in place. And notice as I add in this mate, I get the option to flip alignment directly within a Quick Mates toolbar. Likewise, as I add in this concentric mate, I also get the option to lock rotation. Now, this is extremely beneficial, especially when we have instances where we need to do both at the same time, where we can both flip that alignment and lock rotation all at the same time. So now that we've got those in place, we simply need to pattern those in. Now, for this, we're going to use a pattern-driven pattern, and by selecting the component that we want to pattern, the pattern-driven pattern now sees this as the seed position. In previous releases, it tried to figure out a seed position of its own, which tended to result in a few cases where it didn't work out correctly. But now, no matter where we position that component, it always considers that component being in the seed position. So it gives us the exact pattern that we're looking for from the pattern feature that we select. Next up, configurations. Configurations are a great way of working within our files. It's how we can store different setups, things like that, within a single file itself. Within configurations, we can suppress out components, we can change configurations of specific components if we want. But while we're doing this, it can get quite messy and quite complicated to handle. But through the use of the new configuration table within here, this made a whole lot easier. We can then add in new configurations if we want. We can activate that configuration, and we can then toggle the display or the suppressed state of the components that we want, or even change the configuration of those components. Now, if I was to go back to the manual method of working directly within the assembly, start suppressing out some of these components, even if those components haven't been added to the table, at this point it's automatically adding those to the table for me. So if I pop back to my table now, I can now see that we've got a whole load more components because they've now been suppressed. Within the table, I also have filters within here to make it a whole lot quicker as well. In this case, maybe I want to work with my custom properties. That way I can set my part number to be independent for each configuration that I have. Again, just making life a whole lot simpler for myself. Finally, guys, when working with assemblies, there come occasions when we're working with a bill of materials and there's components that we don't want to be shown within that bill of materials. Now, sure enough, there's always been a way of excluding that component by right-clicking on it, going into its properties, and excluding it from the BOM. But I'd need to do that for every instance and every single time I use that component. Well, with SOLIDWORKS 2022, we now have a new part level property within the configuration properties, that is, where we can now set it to exclude from the bill of materials anytime it's inserted into the assembly. So I now no longer need to remember to do this every single time. I just simply save that into the part, and that's it set for the future. So it's going to do it every single time now. Again, working smarter instead of working harder. Saying that, you may not want to tell your boss that. We're making it a bit easier now. But I'm sure you can agree through all of these enhancements, it's making your job a whole lot easier and a whole lot quicker to do. You're now working and focusing more on the tasks that you've got, as opposed to how am I going to go about doing that? Or what do I need to remember to do every single time? It's a whole lot easier. Now, again, that brings me to the end of the assembly features section, guys, but there's one little section that I just want to point out here, and it's relating to the quick mates alignment. Now, while I had that pop up on screen there, guys, there's two options you need to be aware of to get that to show up. The first one, within the Customize menu, so if you right-click on your command manager, hit Customize, just make sure you've got the option Show OK button selected within there. If you don't have that selected, as soon as you select the mate that you want, that little bar is going to disappear before you get a chance to change the alignment. The other one is within your system options under assemblies. Make sure you have changed mate alignment on edit set to always. That way the mate alignment option is shown within the quick access toolbar. If it's set to never, then it's not going to show up. But with that said, that wraps up the assembly section. So I'll now pass you over to Craig, who's going to take you through the enhancements for drawings.
Thanks for that, Kieran. Some nice enhancements and performance improvements there to the assembly stuff, which is always nice. What we're going to look at next is some of the enhancements to the drawing environment inside SOLIDWORKS. Now, got some bullet points here of some of the kind of rough areas to look at, and then we'll go through some wee examples of them as well. So obviously detailing mode has been around for a wee while, but got some enhancements to detailing mode to make us be able to work on drawings much quicker. We've then got some options for toggling circular dimensions. So sort of different ways of changing from like a radius to a diameter and so on and so forth. Previously there was only kind of one way you could do that, now there's a few different ways. And on that lines there's also what's referred to as a new symmetric linear diameter, which is a new dimension type. We've also got some changes to geometric tolerances. So the kind of user interface is changed slightly for how we can add them. We've also got some changes to cut lists with a detailed cut list, particularly useful for those of us that might use sheet metal or kind of weldments, where you tend to use cut lists a little bit more. We've got a slight change with predefined views, so something that could be set up in your kind of drawing templates to have some predefined views. Now, for those of us that use sheet metal, you can also have some flat pattern views and stuff like that being shown in those predefined views. And then we've also got a change regarding MBD that will show. And obviously this isn't a full list of all the changes in the drawing environment, but just some of the key ones in there. So what we'll do at this point is I'll go through a wee kind of demonstration showing you an example of some of them in action. So companies like U-Boat Rocks need to build it right the first time. And that means clearly communicating through Solidus drawings, and sometimes these files can get huge. For 3 years, detailing mode has been evolving. You can open even your largest prints in just seconds, and then work on them without the overhead of loading any parts or assemblies, or even having them on your machine sometimes. You can add and edit notes, snip in a missing balloon, organise sheets, add dimensions, set tolerances, among some other stuff. New in 2022, you can insert whole tables and standard views from the view palette. When you're done, you can save and even print a completely accurate PDF. What about older drawings though, that maybe haven't been accessed in quite a number of years? In 2022, SOLIDWORKS has extended the ability to open any prior version drawings right into detailing mode. This is great because you'll always be able to open a drawing even if you don't have the reference models. Detailing mode means that you can get to work faster on your documentation tasks. So what else is new in drawings? How about the new in context menu? This pops up and lets you toggle a circular dimension from diameter, radius, linear, and so on and so forth. For turned parts, the new symmetric linear diameter dimension will come in handy. These are double dimensions, which I can apply in a single click to a silhouette edge, or in batch with multi-axis mode. This new annotation type allows for a clean section view by eliminating redundant leader lines. Geometric dimensioning and tolerancing allows functional definition of component features and allowances, so I can clearly illustrate manufacturing intent. SOLIDWORKS 2022 introduces a brand new interface to define these geometric tolerance indicators. The intuitive step-by-step input is easier than ever. Specification, zone, feature, filter, characteristic, modifiers, and datum references. You can add adjacent and auxiliary indicators, text, create stacked and composite indicators, even erase any mistakes that you might make. In a design like this, I have many unique weldment parts, each with their own cut list, and this is rich data, but how do I roll that all up into one assembly level table? With SOLIDWORKS 2022, the detailed cut list option is available for bill of materials of all types. This means you can aggregate multiple cut lists into an assembly BOM, providing you with more flexibility and depth of control. Predefined views are useful to give new drawings a standardized layout, and now in 2022, the flat pattern view is available, and there's a new option to toggle bendline visibility, increasing your ability to automate documentation of sheet metal parts. I know even recently we've had quite a few customers of ours ask about toggling the bendline visibility, so that should be quite handy for them. Proper documentation is a key component of bringing your designs to life. Add clarity to your drawings, share your intent, and finish these tasks faster with SOLIDWORKS 2022. What I've also got is just some examples of the detailing mode changes in regards to saving your drawings. Now, obviously, drawings that are larger and more complex in size, have more sheets, larger models, and so on, those are obviously the models that typically take the longest to save. Now, in SOLIDWORKS 2021, so last year's, there was that new option inside your system settings where you can choose to save model data for a drawing in detailing mode. However, this year in 2022, that's been changed from a system setting to a document property. So that way it doesn't affect also parts and assemblies by kind of accident, which sometimes happened previously. Now it can be controlled on a document by document basis, or it can even be included as part of your drawing templates. That way it's always on or always off, whichever you prefer. If we do use this new option, down at the bottom we've got a little kind of table and a little graph showing how the save times are for particular models. So we've got kind of drawing A through F. Now obviously throughout those 6 drawings they vary in the number of sheets and the complexity, and we can see some models we're getting improvement speeds and saving of kind of 4.5 times quicker. Some are about 1.5, 1.6 times quicker, so it can vary. Obviously, the more complex your model is, the larger the saving typically tends to be. But let's be honest, any improvement is a great thing to always have. And we can see the little graph on the far right of the kind of performance improvement in the dark blue colour in there. I also mentioned a moment ago a little bit about the new detailed cut list. Now, obviously this is available for all BOM types, and as you might be aware, if you've inserted any BOMs into SOLIDWORKS drawings, you have your 3 main types, your kind of top level, parts only, and indented. Still got those options, but now inside them we've got a few extra options regarding the detailed cut list. And if we take the top 2, obviously we can have things like the part level rows being automatically dissolved, appearing in kind of the first level, the all levels for the cut list items. Or obviously with the indented, we've got a few extra options from within there as well. And then finally, we've got some improvements to a little bit more the MBD side of things, so model-based definition for those that are using that to create our kind of 3D PDFs. We can now publish to .html files with the 3D PDF option. So that's where we can create a single file packaged into that HTML format, which can sometimes be a little bit easier to open up. Like you can use Chrome or Firefox, or even a lot of mobile phones can open it. Whereas sometimes people can have issues opening up 3D PDFs if you don't quite have the right software installed to open them up. And that's just some of the improvements to the drawn environment. Obviously, there's a lot more improvements in there than what we can fit into this section, or really any of the sections. So I'm going to hand it back over to Kieran, who's going to take us through the next section on porting with SOLIDWORKS 2022.
Thanks for that, Craig. I must say, the updated interface for the geometric tolerances is a much needed enhancement for SOLIDWORKS. That interface looked a little bit dated for a while now, so it's great to see that that's been added. But moving on from drawings, we're now going to look at import and a little bit of export in there as well. Now, of course, it would be ideal if everyone used SOLIDWORKS as their application. But of course, that's not the case when it comes to working with customers, vendors, manufacturers, whoever it should be. In reality, quite often we use different applications. And that's where the import and export of different files comes into play. So a few of the enhancements that have been made for the import and export of files are the export quality of IFC files. There's also been some enhancements to the import of IFC files. There's a little addition to DXF DWGs where we can now include colour. And finally, there's been some general overall performance enhancements to the import and export of multiple file types. But let's see exactly how that looks. So as I mentioned, when it comes to working with different people, we tend to work with different file formats. In this case, let's say we need to supply an IFC file from our SOLIDWORKS model. Well, with SOLIDWORKS 2022, both the quality and reliability of IFC exports has been enhanced. This means that these IFC files will be more compatible with a wider range of applications. When it comes to the import of IFC files, there's also been some additions here too. In actual fact, we can now go in and filter through each of the objects within the IFC file, select the exact ones that we want to import. In this case, we'll import, say, the walls and the furniture of this model. And that then means that it's only going to process and import the information that we require. Meaning I'm no longer spending the time waiting on it converting the file for components that I don't even need and I'm not even interested in. So it makes it a whole lot quicker. Moving over to DXF and DWGs. When it comes to having, say, this cover for the Nemo manufactured, I want to illustrate that the bend lines is going to be one manufacturing process and that engraved text is going to be another. And a great way of doing that is through the use of coloured sketches. Well, now when exporting DXF and DWG files, it now supports that coloured text. So now when I provide that to a supplier, he can now see the colour differences directly from that DXF or DWG file. So a great little enhancement to see. Now, while those are some of the main enhancements that have been added to the import and export of files, there's also been an overall enhancement to the import and export of all file formats. That being, if we have those files where they've got thousands of faces or bodies that we're trying to import, it should now be quicker than ever before to import those. This means that we no longer have those large waiting times and we can get to work even quicker. For example, say you've got some scan data, quite often has loads of tessellated faces within there, quite often thousands if not hundreds of thousands of faces. It should import a whole lot quicker now in comparison to previous releases. Now, although those are the main areas of enhancements, there's a few great little pointers that I'd like to add for the import and export of files. Primarily for the import. If you're ever trying to import another file format into SOLIDWORKS and you're not too sure either how it's going to go, or maybe you're having issues importing it, great little trick. Try opening that file in a free viewer, for example, eDrawings. If the file doesn't open in that free viewer, it's most likely not going to open up in a CAD application like SOLIDWORKS. That means that it's most likely been an issue from the source application when it's been exported. Another great little tip when we're importing files, if you're ever having issues, try using 3D Interconnect. Now this is an option that's been around for a number of years now, guys, but essentially what 3D Interconnect does is reads the file format the way it is without the need to convert it to a SOLIDWORKS file format. It means, again, it should open up a whole lot quicker because there's no conversion process. And you're then able to get to work on the model. The other thing that it does is it actually retains a link to the source file itself. So if that source file is ever updated, your SOLIDWORKS model updates right along with it. So just some great little tips and tricks to use when we're importing files. Now, With that said, that wraps up the import section. So I'll now pass you over to Scott, who's going to take you through some of the graphics enhancements.
Cheers, Kieran. So we'll now go and take a look at some of the improvements to graphics for SOLIDWORKS 2022. And we can see at the top there that we've now got the correct graphics and textures shown for components that are loaded in lightweight mode. Our cosmetic threads have been improved and completely redesigned for clarity and performance. 3D textures are now faster and more refined with better detail. And our silhouette edges are now no longer CPU dependent, which increases the overall frame rate by about 40% when working with assemblies. So let's dive in, we'll take a look at some examples now. Cosmetic and appearance changes happen regularly throughout the design process, and understanding and updating these changes should happen regardless of when and how you open your files. SOLIDWORKS 2022 now automatically resolves lightweight components that have had graphical or appearance changes, regardless of any features having changed since the components were last saved. This ensures that your components should always appear correctly when you open them up. SOLIDWORKS introduced a unique and simplified way to incorporate complex textures within your designs in a previous release, and by leveraging unique appearances on faces, bodies, or components, textures can be easily created on those surfaces to generate complex geometry more quickly. SOLIDWORKS 2022 delivers increased performance and responsiveness when creating these often complex and highly detailed textures, meaning you can use them in more places without sacrificing performance. Another graphical enhancement for SOLIDWORKS 2022 is the introduction of texture-based cosmetic threads. Now these new cosmetic threads, aside from just looking great, make it much easier to understand which components have threads on them. And these threads can be used for any type of feature that includes cosmetic threads as well, from manually created threads to the new stud feature which we saw in the parts segment earlier on, and of course the whole wizard as well. And finally, performance enhancements are of course very important in helping you work more efficiently, and SOLIDWORKS 2022 has increased the frame rate when rotating parts and assemblies with silhouette edges by over 10%, saving you time with every single zoom, pan and rotate, as you can see from the comparison on screen. So with that, I'm now going to pass you over to Craig, who's going to take a look at some enhancements on the administration side of things.
Thanks for that, Scott. What we're going to look at next is a little bit about the administration side of SOLIDWORKS, particularly in regards to SOLIDWORKS administrative images, something that in previous years tends to get skipped over because there's not too much that's changed, apart from just recently when was added in the ability to run a little test administrative image when it comes to deployment side of things. But this year we've actually got quite a few new enhancements. Now we've got 4 main ones that we're going to look at, and that's going to look at a new type of administrative image, or actually 2 new types of administrative image. We're going to look at the ability to create what's referred to as nested groups for who we're deploying certain images to, and also for those of us that are using SOLIDWORKS PDM or SOLIDWORKS Electrical, we can now actually have some of that additional setup done as part of the administrative image, rather than having to run extra scripts or anything like that afterwards. Now, since the process of creating and setting up an administrative image would actually show you my SOLIDWORKS serial numbers if I was to do this live, this one is going to be a little bit of a pre-recorded video I've got going at the moment, but I'll talk us through it as we're going through it. Administrative images create tailor-made installation packages from the SOLIDWORKS installation files. SOLIDWORKS 2022 brings exciting new enhancements to this process that make deployment more powerful, flexible and organised. SOLIDWORKS 2022 offers 2 new options for deploying administrative images, the remote client and compressed option. The remote client administrative image type was created specifically for remote users. It automatically downloads the bulk of the installation files from the SOLIDWORKS servers instead of over your company VPN. The compressed administrative image contains all the same components as the standard image, but in a reduced file size, which allows for easier sharing. Staying organised is key to a successful deployment scheme. SOLIDWORKS 2022 allows you to create multiple nested groups that reflect your company's preferred hierarchy. Drag and drop makes rearranging items easy and convenient. Each subgroup inherits the settings of the parent groups. This makes editing the administrative image simple and reduces the user XML file size, which makes the deployment a wee bit faster as well. In this example, most users won't need these packages to be installed, so we'll uncheck them in the global settings. However, the users will need access to the SOLIDWORKS PDM server, and now in SOLIDWORKS 2022, we can even create a file vault view after the installation without the need to run any extra custom scripts. The electrical engineers will also need access to the SOLIDWORKS electrical client. Because of the nested structure of the options editor, this is done by checking a single box for the whole group. And now in 2022, the user interface gives a clear indication of what electrical products will be installed. You can still choose to deploy manually or automatically, and of course, these tabs reflect the nested structure of the Setup tab, making it convenient to deploy to the correct users and groups. SOLIDWORKS 2022 makes creating, editing, and deploying administrative images easy and powerful, with better end-to-end support for software packages, improved organizational tools, and flexible new image types. And I know from the past year, we've had obviously a lot of customers working from home. We've actually had a couple of our customers specifically asking for those remote client image types. So that should hopefully help out quite a few of you guys when you come to installing SOLIDWORKS 2022. And with that, I'll pass it back to Kieran, who's going to take us through some examples of what's new in regards to SOLIDWORKS Visualize.
Okay, so moving on to Visualize. And I've got to say, this is always one that I look forward to, because some of the content you can create using Visualize is absolutely mind-blowing. It looks so real. But let's see what some of the new enhancements are within this new release. So we've got things in there where we can now match the camera perspective for our 3D geometry. We can add in what we call a shadow catcher. We'll see what that is in just a moment. We can create patterns now from a single model instance. Previously, we needed at least two. And we even have a new pattern, a scatter pattern within there to give a more randomized effect. We can now group animations together. We can even switch cameras during animations. And we've also got a new output viewer, so we can see all of the outputs that we've created. So let's see what that's all about. Now, bringing a concept to life early in the design stage through product renderings and animations can help accelerate sales and marketing initiatives. So let's see how Visualize 2022 makes this easier than ever to generate professional level outputs for any user. HDRI environments have long been supported in Visualize. And these 3D assets not only apply a background image, but also apply some scene lighting, like this lakeside environment. It's got a great sunlight source, but the background doesn't really meet what would be required for a potential commercial audience. Since 2D stock images are easily accessible and come in all shapes and sizes, these can add the perfect touch to any rendering. But traditionally, it's a trial and error approach to get the perspective of the model to match that of the background image itself. Well, new with Visualize 2022, this process is now simplified by using the match camera capability. Using the 2-point perspective of both the horizon and the ship structure, along with the ship walkway, the camera's focal length is then calculated and applied to the 3D geometry. This builds on the additional photorealism into the project, and it then means that the 3D object is now seamlessly integrated into that background. The next step, of course, would be matching up the shadows from the previously applied HDRI environment to the backplate itself. And this is easily done by simply rotating that environment round. However, what we'll find is that that lighting, or that shadow from the Nemo there, is now bleeding through the wall of the ship. Now, through Visualize 2022, this has made an easy task by adding in some primitive geometry. In this case, we're going to add in a wall within here. By adding in a wall, it essentially adds in a plane which can be moved into position to reflect the wall itself. And then by setting this wall to be a shadow catcher, it then means that it's able to catch the shadow on the wall, however, be hidden out at the same time. So it then adds to the realism of this model. Now, it would be criminal not to capture this Nemo in its natural habitat. So we're going to leverage some configurations within here, swap out that backplate, and we're now going to drop this Nemo underwater. Again, can adjust a few settings for our focal length, and I'm even going to swap my camera to a top view here, and I'm going to add in some lighting, and I'm going to match it to this current camera angle. That way it now looks like the sun's reflecting down through the water. Next up, it'd look a whole lot better if we had some fish within here, for example. Say we take this blue line snapper. Sure enough, I can then manipulate this model around. This is something that we've always been able to do. But what would be better than one fish would be if we had a school of fish. Well, with Visualize 2022, we can now create a pattern from that single instance. And not only that, we can now use the new scatter pattern, where we can adjust the sizes of the bounding box in order to span out those fish to meet our needs. Finally, for a third animation or third render, we're going to add in another configuration and start to animate the explosion of this model. So grouping is now selected and keyframes added for each of these groups, where we can then explode the model out as and where needed. To make things easier in Visualize 2022, we can now group these animation keyframes together. Not only that, we can even color coordinate them, making it easier to see which keyframe is which, and it makes it a whole lot easier to drag and manipulate within our timeline. Now, we're also going to add in some camera animation within here. This first camera animation looks great. And sure enough, I could move that camera around, but to add a real professional technique to this animation is having multiple cameras. So we'll add in a few of those as well. But in order to get those to transition from one to another, we can now add in this camera sequence animation, where we can specify at which point in time within our animation we want which camera to be active. So it then adds an extra level of depth within our renders. So now that we have all of our renders set up, we can then render them out. Again, with Visualize 2022, we now have this new output viewer, where it captures all of the renders that we've created. We can view each of the animations if we want to as well, and we can even rerun that render if required. So through the use of all of these enhancements, it's making life a whole lot easier, and we can now add an extra level of depth to our outputs. It makes things look realer than, or more realistic, should I say, than they ever have before. Now, while those are the main enhancements for Visualize, there are also some additional ones within here as well. One of which is the ability to support corner radius with advanced appearances. So at that top right image that we can see there on the left hand side, we've got an appearance which is applied, and it's got that bump mapping applied to it. So it's got that grain effect, that sort of brushed effect to it. However, on the right hand side, we've also got that appearance along with that 2mm corner radius. Now in previous releases, we couldn't actually do both of these at the same time. We had to pick one or the other. However, it's now supported in combination. To follow on from cosmetic threads, which Scott discussed in the parts section, Cosmetic threads even have a more realistic approach when it comes to visualize as well. Not only does it use the new appearance which has been applied in SolidWorks, it now also applies an appropriate mapping so it looks realistic directly from the imported stage. Finally, we now support multiple motion studies at import. So if you're creating motion studies within SolidWorks, whether that be an animation, an advanced motion study, or a motion analysis through the use of contacts, springs, you could be using motors, we can now import all of those within Visualize as well. And finally, we can also repurpose multiple explode views. So if you're more comfortable exploding that model out in SolidWorks, by all means, do it within SolidWorks, and then simply import that animation into Visualize for a final output render. So there's a whole load of enhancements when it comes to Visualize, and I'm sure you can see the benefits and how realistic we can make our images look with these enhancements. But with that said, I'll now pass you over to Craig, who's going to take you through some enhancements for inspection.
Thanks, Kieran. I think that'll actually be quite a hard act to follow with what's new in Visualize. It's always one of the areas that I'm always really interested in learning what's new. But what I'll do is take us through some of the stuff that's new with SolidWorks Inspection. What we've got is some enhancements to the support for inspection in regards to both SolidWorks native parts and assemblies, as well as also support for NX and Unigraph files as well. We've got improvements to the smart extraction tool inside inspection to have the auto balloons and all of that populate, as well as the addition of the inspection API should any of us want to get fancy with the coding side of things. But we'll have a little look at some of those enhancements in a wee bit more detail now. Whether you're working with in-house or outsourced manufacturing, monitoring and verifying critical geometry is key to ensuring consistency with your products. So let's see how SolidWorks Inspection 2022 continues to simplify and automate QA operations. The standalone version of SolidWorks Inspection has historically relied on 2D PDFs and image files to start the ballooning process. However, now in 2022, support for additional file types has been introduced, including NX and the much anticipated native SolidWorks drawings. Here, you can start the project off by importing a SolidWorks drawing directly into the standalone application and then extracting relevant part information such as description, part number, current revision, and so on. The same smart extraction method is used to gather dimensional and tolerance characteristics needed for this report. From the title block, an additional surface profile tolerance note is additionally ballooned and extracted with just a simple click. You'll see SolidWorks Inspection identifies the GD&T symbol, precision, and geometric tolerance indicators, which will all be carried downstream into your first article or process reports. Continuing through the extraction process, whole callouts and geometric tolerances are ballooned and remapped to the project's bill of characteristics. Investigating Balloon 5, which is home to multiple dimensional requirements, SolidWorks Inspection automatically identifies each and has broken them into sub-balloons as shown in the table. Repeating these steps for the required tolerances and dimensional counts is a breeze, no manual data entry required. But what if we wanted to better communicate this information from the 3D part itself? SolidWorks Inspection 2022 has dramatically improved the performance and support for SolidWorks part files, which can be directly added into the inspection report alongside the current 2D sheet. The extraction process is the same as in 2D drawings, pulling in and identifying the geometric tolerances and positional information, but now ballooned into the 3D part. During the assembly of this bracket, a few critical welds along with some surface finish requirements are also required to be inspected. Inspection 2022 now fully supports importing SolidWorks assemblies to ensure proper fit, form and function with all manufactured and assembly items. With the bill of characteristics created, This package can now be saved with all the associated 2D and 3D data without having to access any of the drawing parts or assemblies inside the SOLIDWORKS application. Inspection reports can be generated and include both 2D and 3D PDFs, along with the necessary Excel documentation. SOLIDWORKS Inspection is also available directly inside of SOLIDWORKS itself as an add-in, and new in Inspection 2022 is full support for API. The highly requested enhancements help to automate the creation, ballooning, modification, extraction, and exporting of first article and in-process inspection reports. With all new file type support and increased automation in SOLIDWORKS Inspection 2022, there has never been a better time to revisit your current quality assurance process. So some small but nice enhancements there to the inspection package. And with that, I'll hand it back to Scott, who'll take us through the next section on SOLIDWORKS routing.
Thanks for that, Craig. So we'll now go and take a look at some of the enhancements to routing for SOLIDWORKS 2022. And first of all, we can see that C points can now be created inside SOLIDWORKS without launching the Routing Library Manager, which is a great enhancement. The design library now supports back shells and harnesses can route through them. And we also have documentation support in flatten route for back shells as well. So let's go and take a look at this in a bit more detail now. Creating electrical information for a SOLIDWORKS part doesn't need to be a long drawn out process. Adding connection points in SOLIDWORKS has been made easier for 2022. They can now be added inside SOLIDWORKS by going to Tools, SOLIDWORKS Electrical, where you can select Create C Point with Manufacturer Part. In this dialog, it remembers the last manufacturer part that was used, or you can browse and select a different manufacturer part from an extensive library. The terminal list shows the list of connection points that need to be added, and selecting a point or an edge in SOLIDWORKS updates the table. Selecting OK will add these terminals to the part. Going back into that dialog reveals what terminals already have been placed and which terminals remain unassigned. The ability to select the point or an edge in SOLIDWORKS to add the connection point with these table updates allows you to quickly create electrical components from inside SOLIDWORKS. Back shells are also now supported in SOLIDWORKS 2022, and here we have two harnesses from the battery to the control panel and external plug, and we can see that the two harnesses are routed. Now that the routes are in place, we can add back shells, which are available from the design library, to the connectors to remove stress between contacts and wires. In this case, a 45-degree spin coupling was used and mated to the connectors. This connector with a back shell will need adjusted so that the harness can go through the back shell, and after editing the red harness and selecting the body of the back shell, we can choose Edit Route Alignment, select the spline of the harness and then the axis of the back shell, and as you can see, the harness adjusts and goes through the back shell. Efficient use of back shells during design will protect the junction between contacts and wires and eliminate delays and costly redesigns further down the line. Manually creating harness drawings and tables can be time consuming and error prone, and Flatten Route in SOLIDWORKS 2022 automates this process and now supports back shells as well. Flattening this red harness will include back shells along with the harness and connectors in its 3D position, and will show them in appropriate locations. In the Flatten Route dialog, we can choose what detail of documentation we want to include. This will produce the harness drawn with connectors, back shells, tables and callouts automatically, and saves time for engineers to go and tackle other challenges. So as we've seen there, SOLIDWORKS lets you quickly create electrical information for components, add and manipulate back shells for contact and wire protection, and create flattened harness drawings that include back shells. So that takes us nicely onto electrical, for which I'll pass you back to Kieran.
Thanks for that, Scott. So sticking along the electrical routing side of things, what we're going to do next is have a look at electrical, this time 2D. So let's have a look and see what some of the enhancements are for electrical 2D. Well, the major enhancement is incorporation of the electrical content portal from within the SOLIDWORKS electrical interface. It's now been added in within the task pane within there, making it even easier to use. Now, if anyone's never used the electrical content portal, essentially what it is a large database of thousands of manufacturers' components where you can go through and search the one that you're looking for. And what we'll find is that it has the associated symbols, 2D footprints, manufacturer's parts, everything that you need for your electrical project. But as I mentioned, within 2022, the electrical content portal can now be added into your task pane underneath the View tab there. Again, we can search for the components that we need. And once we've found them, we can even have a look to see what exactly is included with our search results. So does it have the 2D footprints that we need? Does it have the 2D symbols? Does it have the manufacturer's parts? And we can download and start to use them from directly within the electrical interface itself. So it's streamlining that process. Now, another few enhancements for Electrical 2022 is there's been increased performance in multi-user electrical design environments. Now, if any of you use it in a multi-user design environment, what you may find is when multiple engineers are working on the same project at the same time, you may start to get a little bit of lag and things like that. Well, with Electrical 2022, that's been streamlined and should work a whole lot smoother. It also means that data is shared a lot more easily. Another enhancement that we have is the improved navigation in electrical reports. What I mean by that is we now support multiple hyperlinks within one merged cell. So where we have, say, multiple components listed within one cell, we can have links to all of those. Where if we right click on it, we can select which component we want. Do we want to look at the manufacturer part properties? Or do we even just want to look at the data sheet for that component? We can even zoom to that component from within the drawing as well. So again, streamlining that process. Another enhancement that we have with 2022 is an updated user interface. What we'll find is that some of the commands have now been added in under the File drop-down menu. We have our ribbon, which is now able to expand and collapse should we want it to. And we'll even notice that some of the icons have been updated so they now suit the more up-to-date user interface. Finally, the last enhancement that we have here is a new addition to the origin and destination arrows. Because what we have with origin destination arrows now is a new connection attribute. So it now not only tells you where this connects up with, on what sheet, which row, but it also tells us which component it connects up to and at what terminal does it connect to that component. So I can now quickly and easily see at a glance from my schematics what is happening with my design. Again, just making your life a whole lot easier. So that wraps up the electrical side of things, but I'll now pass you over to Craig, who's going to take you through some of the fundamentals when it comes to installing SOLIDWORKS 2022. What are the new updated requirements? And is there anything else that we need to consider? So next up, here we've got Craig.
Thanks for that, Kieran. So at this point, if we're following along on the kind of left-hand side of the screen, we're going to kind of take a pause for the moment after the electrical section that Kieran just showed us, where we'll cover the simulation and the stuff after that tomorrow. But what I want us to do is to take a look a little bit about the kind of installation side of SOLIDWORKS 2022, both in terms of system requirements, in terms of any hardware, but also any software like operating systems, SQL, and things of that nature. Now, the system requirements or hardware requirements for 2022 SOLIDWORKS is pretty much the exact same as 2021. So if you're already on 2021, there should be no need to change or update anything. For those that are on earlier versions, such as SOLIDWORKS 2020, 2019, or earlier, there was obviously a change kind of last year with some of the system requirements. Not necessarily because SOLIDWORKS itself needs more kind of CPU power or more RAM or anything like that, but more so that other software is tending to use more resources, which typically leaves less resources left over for SOLIDWORKS to use. So that's why the system requirements were kind of upped last year, and that's what I've kind of got on screen. Now I have put on the kind of far right section a little bit more of a kind of TMS recommendations for SOLIDWORKS 2022. Not too dissimilar from SOLIDWORKS, but just what we would recommend a wee bit more in terms of for the graphics card section. On the NVIDIA side at least, the Quadro P1000 is the kind of lowest spec graphics card that's got supported drivers going forward. However, that card is still getting a good few years old at this point, so that's where, if we can, we would generally recommend a slightly newer variant with the Quadro T1000, or just a slightly higher spec of the Quadro P series cards. As well, with the RAM side of things, not only ourselves but technically SOLIDWORKS as well also recommend what's referred to as ECC RAM to help with some kind of error correction for the drives on the machine. That's typically something people don't always pay much attention to. SOLIDWORKS do recommend that users use an SSD drive, although you can use things like M.2 drives instead. Although do pay close attention to the speeds of those individual drives, because those can even vary quite a lot. For the operating system, typically just Windows 10, although we'd always recommend trying to keep up to date with any Windows updates that are pending, with the most recent kind of big update being the 2021 kind of H1 update that was earlier on in the year. And then again, for Microsoft Office, we typically try and recommend users stay on the latest version of that as well. What we then have is some requirements that are a little bit more in the server side of things. So that's for customers that either have SOLIDWORKS PDM, or if you're just using the network licenses for SOLIDWORKS, this would affect you guys. There isn't too much change in regards to the kind of server OS. You'll have typically Windows Server 2016, 2019, and so on. That's the same as in 2021. However, we would probably start to recommend that users, if they're going to update the server OS, trying to go to Windows Server 2019 rather than 2016, just to make things a little bit newer. For the SQL side of things, that's where things do change a little bit. If you're on SQL 2014 Service Pack 3 or earlier, that will not work with SOLIDWORKS/PDM 2022. That's where you will need to use SQL 2016 or newer. I have put a wee note at the bottom as well, just to make people aware, for those of you that are using PDM Professional, that from 2016 onwards, Microsoft did change the licensing model for SQL. So if you've got an older version of SQL with older licenses, you might need to purchase slightly different SQL licenses from a Microsoft reseller. For the drives as well, again, that's something typically most people just have in the server basic hard drives. However, it is technically recommended to have SSDs in the server if possible, particularly with PDM when it comes to checking in, checking out files. If we have super fast SSDs on our users' machines, but then really slow mechanical drives on the server, that's obviously going to be where the bottleneck may be. I've also put underneath that, again, it's not really SOLIDWORKS system requirements or recommendations, that's why I've put kind of NA at the bottom there. But when it comes to network speeds, for those of us with PDM, I would say if we can try and have at least 100 meg network connection between the server and the user's machines, that would obviously help with the checking in, checking out of files and certain other transactions that typically go on with PDM. If you're just using the server for network licenses, the speed can be much slower than that and should still work perfectly fine. What I've then got is two separate slides that go over a little bit of the kind of end of life of some of the software. Now, starting off with the kind of Windows server, with the Windows kind of operating system side of things, obviously those are on still Windows 7. That did obviously become end of life with 2022 SOLIDWORKS. So obviously if you've been using SOLIDWORKS 2021 last year, you know you'll already have had to update to Windows 10. And Windows 10 still doesn't have any end of life date, so it's still active for the foreseeable future. Windows 11, which just recently came out, if anyone's updated to that. At this exact moment in time, there isn't a start date for when that will be supported with SOLIDWORKS, although we do expect that to be fairly soon with one of these service pack updates, and obviously the end of life for that will be quite a while away at this point. For the Windows Server side of things, obviously we mentioned last year and the year before, Windows Server 2012 R2 has obviously been end of life for a wee while now. Windows Server 2016, still good for another couple of years, but its end of life will be with SOLIDWORKS 2023 Service Pack 5. So eventually when SOLIDWORKS 2024 comes out, that'll be end of life at that point. Windows Server 2019 is obviously the most up-to-date version at the moment, so that's why that's currently the kind of active version as I've classified it. And then obviously we've got Windows Server 2022, which, similar to Windows 11, doesn't have a confirmed start or end of life at the moment. Some of the other software that can have end of lives is the SQL side of things. Now, I already mentioned, for those that are going to update to PDM 2022, you will also have to update to at least SQL 2016. Now, if you are on SQL 2012 or 2014, rather than updating to SQL 2016, I would recommend trying to get to the latest version, so ideally SQL 2019 or at least 2017. That way you've got at least a handful of years of support left with that side. And then finally we've got the Office software. Office 2013 is obviously end of life already. Office 2016 and 2017 do have end of life dates, which are going to be the end of 2023. So again, still a wee bit to go on that. And then Office 2021 is obviously going to be the latest version. Again, that doesn't have a confirmed start or end of life at the moment. So with that, that's just a quick kind of overview of some of the information that might be useful for those that are going to update to SOLIDWORKS 2022. At this point, I'll pass it back to Scott, who's going to go through a little bit of a kind of recap of the day and then talk us a little bit about what we're going to see tomorrow. So over to you, Scott.
Alright, thanks for that, Craig. So that just about wraps things up for today. So if we take a quick look back over what we've covered, we started off with the user interface, which always has some nice enhancements to make our lives a little bit easier. We then covered the big three, parts, assemblies and drawings, where we saw a whole bunch of new features that I'm sure you're all looking forward to using. After that we looked at imports, graphics and admin. Again, some really nice stuff in there that will speed up our day-to-day tasks. And we also looked at some of the other SOLIDWORKS products like Visualize, Inspection, Routing and Electrical, and saw some really handy improvements there as well, before Craig gave us a rundown of everything to keep in mind when it comes to installing SOLIDWORKS 2022. So looking ahead for tomorrow, we'll finish off this deeper dive into the enhancements for SOLIDWORKS 2022, starting off with Kieran taking us through some simulation, flow sim and plastics, before Craig wraps this section up with our data management enhancements. We'll then begin our section on the capabilities of the 3D Experience platform, starting off with myself taking a look at some cloud-based sculpting, before we return to Craig and Kieran on the data management and simulation segments, only this time we'll be in the cloud. We'll then take a quick look at DraftSite with Mike, and if things weren't confusing enough, we have a different Kieran taking a look at the RX tool and how you can log an enhancement request, just in case there's something you were hoping to see that didn't pop up in our presentations there. And with that, we'll say thanks to you guys for attending, and if you have any burning questions, then now is the time to let us know. Cheers.